Morena. Tēnā koutou. O kunei rangatira o tēnā kaupapa, ko ngā kāinga mō te iwi. He uri tēnei no whanganui, ko rua peihu te maunga, ko whanganui te awa tūpuna, ko au te awa, ko te awa ko au. Ko te ati haunui a paparangi i te iwi ki Porirua, ko Deben tuku ingoa, he kaimahi o te matapihi, tēnā koutou. Good morning, everybody. Today, I'm going to be talking about progressive home ownership, and we'll be heading into a wānanga style where I'm going to lecture on a little bit of what is this and a little bit of what is that. Then we'll be asking whether or not the PHO scheme has worked for Māori. It is a closed question. The answer to that is a very simple two-letter word. If I was to extend that out to 2 words, my first word would be beginning with an F. But what interests me more in that question is the why, and I'm actually going to be spending a little bit of my time on that part. Then I'm going to be offering 2 suggestions on how this can be improved, and because I'm a non-traditionalist, I'm then going to conclude with a non-conclusion. What is progressive home ownership? This is a model that assists families and individuals who face challenges in accessing traditional mortgage arrangements to purchase their own homes. It's an alternative tenure that provides a supported and affordable pathway to home ownership. It does not look to replace a traditional mortgage, but instead it supports people to access a mortgage to a level that they can actually afford, giving them the chance to build equity and achieve the dream of owning their own home. PHO is a proven pathway to home ownership for those households that would not otherwise be able to become homeowners. And as I think we've been hearing throughout this conference this week, it is something that we very much need to be focusing on. In Aotearoa, PHO is mainly delivered through 3 options. These are rent to buy, shared ownership, and leasehold. And I'm just going to point out that all of those pictures I've actually nabbed off the net, so I do actually acknowledge them in a little while. Under rent to buy, it's where the household agrees to initially rent the home they want to purchase. The household and PHO provider may agree arrangements which enable the whānau to build a deposit or potential equity that will go towards purchasing the home. After an agreed period, such as 5 years, the household will have enough set aside as a deposit to purchase the house. And an example of a PHO provider that has delivered this model successfully is Habitat for Humanity, who has been active in Aotearoa for 3 decades. Sorry, Alan, 3 decades. Shared equity. This is where the household and an equity partner each become a part owner in the house. Normally, the whānau living in the house has the biggest share of the property. This is made up of a deposit and a traditional mortgage, and over time the household will buy out the equity partner. And an example of that is the Housing Foundation, who have been active for 2 decades. In the leasehold model, this enables the landowner or the landholder, such as iwi, to retain ownership of their land while providing an affordable pathway to home ownership. How it works is whānau enter an arrangement to occupy the property, something like a right to occupy agreement, and this allows them to purchase the house that sits on the land without the additional burden of purchasing the land. Whānau can then purchase the house, usually with the traditional deposit and mortgage arrangement. So a little bit of a theme here. An example of this includes Queenstown Lakes Community Housing Trust. And Ian and I didn't agree to talk about you a lot, Julie, it's just what is happening, which has been operational for 2 decades. We've heard over the past few days from providers and researchers about the benefits of home ownership, and here's a few more. The first one is addressing housing affordability. Ian's actually covered that really well, so I won't go into that part of things. On the limited access to mortgage finance, it's where some individuals in whānau may have stable incomes and the ability to make regular mortgage payments, but they struggle to access mortgage finance due to factors such as low deposits or irregular income sources. Māori and Pacific households are less likely to be able to secure a mortgage, and progressive home ownership provides an opportunity for these individuals and whānau to overcome barriers and enter the housing market, as the models focus on affordability, flexibility, and gradually increasing ownership stakes. Social and community inclusion. This is where PHO helps to create a sense of stability, security, and belonging, allowing people to establish roots in their communities. There is good research to show that owning your home increases the health, well-being, education, and job prospects for everybody that lives in that home. This in turn creates intergenerational well-being. Government objectives. Our government recognises the importance of ensuring housing affordability and increasing home ownership rates. We can see that in the funding that has been provided in the last couple of years. PHO aligns with these policy objectives by offering a sustainable and inclusive approach to housing that complements traditional home ownership options and addresses the needs of those who face financial constraints or limited access to mortgages. And the most important reason is because we all deserve it. Home ownership rates have overall been in decline for nearly 100 years for Māori, but we are not doing this to ourselves. We have had land. During the early part of colonisation, we had land. We were industrious, building our commercial acumen and trading locally, nationally, and internationally. Staying with the past, we can see decision-making and policy settings have reduced our land holdings, strangled our industry, and hampered our ability to build on the land that we do have. We heard from Charles yesterday, who spoke of the post-war era and the support of government to increase home ownership. And just as the tide was turning for Māori, support shifted, and we are where we are today. We can see behaviours that have marginalised and demeaned us, all contributing to these declining rates. Bringing ourselves to the present, PHO gives our government and their agencies the opportunity to address this human-made imbalance by providing an inclusive pathway to home ownership and access to affordable homes. When we break down the barriers to becoming homeowners, PHO empowers individuals and families to build equity, to gain stability and establish a sense of ownership in the communities that they live in. PHO is our opportunity to show a collaborative effort between government, housing providers, whānau and individuals to create a more accessible and equitable housing market in Aotearoa, New Zealand. In short, the Progressive Home Ownership Scheme is supposed to be the answer to that. In July 2020, Government made $400 million available through the Progressive Home Ownership Fund. The intent is to increase opportunities for people to access home ownership who would not otherwise have been able to do so. There are three priority groups identified, which are Māori, Pacific people and families with children. The government expects the 4-year PHO scheme will support between 1,500 and 4,000 households, and this is due to be fully allocated by 30 June 2024. Clearly, I need to pause because I can't move it forward. Anyone able to? There we go. What makes the scheme so attractive is that the scheme offers approved PHO providers funding through a 15-year interest-free loan. For those of us paying a mortgage, wouldn't we all love that? The PHO providers then use that money to build homes to partner with individuals and whānau in a rent-to-buy, shared equity or leasehold arrangement. There is also provision for whānau to enter a shared equity arrangement with Kāinga Ora, who we all know is the housing delivery arm for government. The 15-year interest-free loans are for about 20% of the purchase price or up to $200,000, whichever is lower. And these can be accessed through three pathways. The first is an independent pathway called the First Home Partner Pathway and is delivered by Kāinga Ora. It's an independent pathway for aspiring homeowners who don't have quite enough deposit to buy a brand new home. Whānau are expected to navigate the Kāinga Ora process, attain bank finance and find their own home to purchase. There are two supported pathways. The first is the provider pathway, and this is where an approved PHO provider will often work with families to pay down debt, increase their savings and prepare to be a homeowner. Providers will often work with families for up to 2 years before the household then becomes a homeowner. The provider will develop the property within the purchase price criteria that has been set by Te Tuapapa Kura Kāinga. And the second one is Te O Takitaki, which is the same as the provider pathway, but delivery is through iwi and Māori organisations. Te O Takitaki is presented as the pathway that is more flexible and supportive of iwi and Māori organisations that are new to the PHO. And I will talk in more detail about how that intent has not been realised. Just before I move on to, I'm going to have a wee drink. I've been talking a lot over the last few days and my throat is getting a bit croaky. Also gives you time to have a wee look at this table. You're going to see it a couple of times in the rest of my presentation. The table shows that 11% of the fund has gone to Māori, 10% to Pacific, and 68% to families with children. There's another group here which is the non-priority group, and to understand that one a bit more, we need to look at the families with children data a bit longer. The way the data is collected means that a Māori person can also be part of a family with children. After all, we do have kids. That person can be counted in more than one group, and unfortunately, the family with children group is not broken down by ethnicity. And what this means is that the family group is counting Māori and Pacific twice. And at this point, there is no method to extract that out. This is why the non-priority group is expressed as a minimum of 11%. It could be 11%. It could also be 12%, 20%, or 35%. We have no way of knowing. What we do know is that the PHO scheme is delivering to the non-priority group better than it is delivering to Māori and Pacific. We also know that this high level of delivery to the non-priority group is predominantly being delivered through Kāinga Ora. Here is another table that shows how the funds of the PHO scheme has been allocated across the pathways. And Te Tuapapa Kura Kāinga has kindly shared the latest data with me for today. What we can see is how much of the fund was used for a pilot, how much has been allocated to each pathway, the discretionary part towards the bottom, which at this point is for the pathways that are doing the best, and how much has been contracted or allocated, and what's left in the kitty and needs to be allocated in the next year. The part that I want to focus on for pretty much the rest of my presentation is the pilot. And this is because, in my opinion, that is where the success or failure of the PHO scheme being able to deliver to Māori was decided. Te Tuapapa Kura Kāinga piloted the Progressive Home Ownership Fund over 2020-21 to test approaches before formally launching the fund on the 1st of July 21. Participation was by invitation only, with an intent to learn from existing PHO providers and build the application process before opening the scheme to others. We can see in the table that 31.8 million was for the provider pathway, which included Housing Foundation, Queenstown Lakes, and Habitat for Humanity. Under Te O Takitaki, it was Manawa PHO Limited, and you will hear more about them from Vic shortly. On the face of it, this seems like a good approach. It's always good to test drive the car before putting it on the road. But what Te Matapihi and our stakeholders couldn't understand was how government was going to build a scheme that delivers to Māori and how it was going to meet its treaty obligations if it wasn't making a concerted effort to learn how to build an accessible process for Māori through the pilot. In our opinion, the pilot should have contracted 4 Māori and 3 mainstream providers. In fairness to HUD, they did invite 2 other Māori providers to join the pilot, but these providers were not able to progress to the contract stage. That government could not provide an application process Māori could engage with should have been enough for them to know what was to come once the fund was fully released. What would have made a difference is if at this point government paused and reconsidered the application process. As a contrast to the PHO scheme, I want to share with you 2 other funds that has enabled Māori to deliver progressive home ownership. Te Ara Mauwhare was delivered by Te Puni Kokiri. It is a pathway to home ownership that co-invests with iwi and Māori organisations to identify, trial and evaluate innovative approaches to support low to medium income whānau into home ownership. The word innovative is important here because it shows that government was open to failure as a part of the learning process. The budget was for $9 million over 4 years from 2017 to 2021. The fund built capacity and capability of organisations and further supported them by partnering with Sorted Kāinga Ora. This is a government-funded financial wellbeing program that whānau needed to complete before being able to purchase a home under Te Ara Mauwhare. The organisations that were supported through this program were He Korowai Trust, Ka Uru Ora Housing Trust, Chatham Islands Housing Partnership, Te Tihi o Ruahine Whānau Ora, Te Tai Whenua o Heretaunga, and Te Runanganui o Ngāti Parau. I did go a little bit too quick. Thank you. An example of one of these providers is He Korowai Trust. They have developed a model that brings together a leasehold model on Māori land, rent to buy, and renovated, relocated kāinga ora homes. This is affordable housing and affordable payments. At the time this model was designed, the medium income in Kaitaia was $22,500 per annum. There is no doubt that home ownership on that income is virtually impossible without government support. But I do wonder why, with the budget and resources available with the PHO scheme, why we couldn't develop a similar sustainable model that delivered opportunities for Māori on $53,000 per annum. $53,000 is the average income for Māori. Currently, the PHO scheme is designed for incomes to $130,000. Most Māori do not earn that. To shift the dial for Māori, we should be designing funds and running pilots for where Māori are at. He Korowai Trust set their focus, put their whānau first, and designed a PHO model for the reality of where their whānau were at. The next fund I want to share with you is Whai Kāinga Whai Oranga, which was released in 2021, the same year as the PHO scheme. Like the PHO scheme, Whai Kāinga Whai Oranga was developed and is delivered within Te Tuapapa Kura Kāinga. The fund offers investment at scale and leaves iwi and Māori entities to apply a kaupapa Māori approach to their housing development. There are agreed outcomes built into the contracts, but the planning and development of Māori housing models rest primarily with the rōpū. It is a high trust model, and to date around 1,000 homes have been contracted, and just under 10% of those being for a supported home ownership model. What this seems to mean is that Māori can access PHO more easily outside of the specific scheme for progressive home ownership. It raises the question about why that might be, and to be honest, I don't have enough time to get into all of that. But one of the things you will hear is that Te Ara Mauwhare and Whai Kāinga Whai Oranga are grants, and they don't need to be repaid. whereas the PHO scheme is an interest-free loan, and this does need to be repaid. While there may be some validity to that, and I do accept it, what we can see in this table is that Māori aren't even getting to that stage. Māori haven't even hit that barrier yet. Another thing you may hear is that Māori are new to this space and need to build their capability in this area. True to some degree, but for me this one is less valid. Remember Te Ara Mauwhare and the 6 organisations that were supported to build capability in this area. They haven't been able to progress to the contract stage, and that isn't because they haven't tried. Also to note is that it isn't just Māori that are new to this space, so it isn't fair to place the stigma of capability only on the shoulders of Māori. Coming back to the pilot, 3 mainstream providers received an average of 10.5 million and 1 Māori provider received 7.2 million. This was a decision made by government. Imagine the richness of the learning that would have been available if that one lone provider had another 3 Māori organisations added to it. And also the very different story that I would be sharing with you today. There are 2 suggestions that I offer for improvement. The first speaks to how we could have got better outcomes from the PHO pilot, and the second is how we can create change now and improve the 11% that's being delivered to Māori. The first suggestion is adding a mandatory research component to every fund. This should occur during the design of every fund and would be ideal if it was maintained during the delivery of the fund as well. If we take the PHO scheme as our example, how I see this working is at the time government announced the 400 million allocation, it also set aside 4 million or 1% of the fund for research. This amount would be shared equally between the 2 peak bodies, CHA and Te Matapihi, and would be renewable every 2 years. Each peak body would have researchers beside them and their members to observe and document the design process and then the delivery process. The researchers would contribute to system changes, minister briefings, and any submissions on legislative updates. What this gives to government is change. If we want to make a difference, we need to be the difference. It gives academic observation while it is happening and provides opportunity to adapt a lot quicker so that the design of a fund has a higher chance of success when it is being delivered. It also provides a continuous quality improvement process for government, and it will build better relationships across stakeholders as there will be a mechanism for all voices to be heard. So we remember this table, and I'm going to try and connect this a little bit to KiwiBuild. My second suggestion is for Kāinga Ora to adapt their delivery model and for targets to be set. I have a lot of respect and empathy for people when they are honest and vulnerable and say that they can't do something. And I did feel that way when Kāinga Ora said they could not deliver the first home partner pathway to Māori. However, I wasn't a fan when instead of leaning into that and coming up with solutions, their obligation was downgraded to only needing to promote the first home partner pathway to priority groups. And this is where KiwiBuild comes in. The first home partner is performing on par with KiwiBuild, and that less than 5% of the pathway is delivering to Māori. I had hoped that KiwiBuild was an anomaly and that government would learn from this model and we would never see another fund perform so poorly for Māori. Unfortunately, we have the first home partner pathway, and what this shows us is that without the right incentives, Kāinga Ora is not able to self-regulate itself and deliver to Māori. As a matter of urgency, the exemption that Kāinga Ora has been given needs to be revoked and targets need to be set. Kāinga Ora is the housing delivery arm for government. It has an obligation to Māori through Te Tiriti o Waitangi. It has an obligation to Māori through legislation. There needs to be a strong message that kāinga ora must produce outcomes for Māori. My conclusion, as I said at the beginning, is going to be a bit different in that I'm not going to rehash what I've already said. Instead, I'm going to leave you with 2.5 things that I haven't mentioned. The first is that we have enough time and enough money in the PHO scheme to turn things around, but the government needs to act and it needs to start now. The second is that the PHO scheme needs to continue beyond 2024. If my first point comes true and we can show successful Māori, we can show successful Pacific people, then absolutely the PHO scheme needs to continue. And in the wise words of Charles Waldegrave, the right government support needs to happen for at least a decade to see the results. And my point 5 is a saying that I believe in, which is that now is always the right time to be doing the right thing. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Thank you.